If you don't mind, I'll talk up here. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight, and welcome to everyone online. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we have Miranda and Christine from the New York State DEC. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A. That would be helpful. Also, just logistics for those that are here. If you've not been here, how many's not been here before? Oh, welcome. Fabulous. Okay. Bathrooms and water fountain are right out that door. If goodness, let's hope not, we hear an alarm, we all need to leave the front door and go to the farthest part of the parking lot, and I'll make sure everybody's there safely. Other than that, if you can ask questions, as they have said, you can ask all along if you have a question during the presentation instead of waiting to the end, and I will let them introduce themselves and what they do. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Christine. This is Miranda. So we're here today to talk about, turn camera on. There we go. Hi, online people. So today we're here to talk about rethinking wasted food. We're going to touch upon that, and then we'll move into home composting. We've got a good number of slides. We can share the slideshow afterwards if you want to send it out to everyone who's registered, so that's not a problem. There we go. So just a quick introduction of DEC, what we do there, where we're located. So we're located in our central office in Albany, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. We're within our Division of Materials Management. So we look at waste across the state, regulate it, kind of promote reduction, reuse, and recycling. And then we're within the organics reduction and recycling section. So our section really focuses on organics recycling, largely composting across the state. And that's composting of all sizes. We regulate large-scale composting facilities across the state, and then we go all the way down to educating people about home composting. We do any type of policy. We have a state law actually called the New York State Food Donation and Food Scraps Recycling Law. That's a law that requires large businesses to donate excess food and recycle their food scraps. So we're kind of working in every element. We also provide grant programs for municipalities if any of you are part of sustainable committees with your town, village, city, etc.
So before we get into the wasted food reduction topic, as well as home composting, we just wanted to provide a little bit of an overview on the problem with wasted food and food scraps. So between 30 and 40% of the food supply grown each year in the United States is wasted. And this not only is a huge quantity, but it also contributes to a variety of environmental, social, and economic issues. Just because we have a lot to get through today, we're not going to go into these specifically, but we'll touch on a few throughout. So where does this food come from that we're wasting? It comes from all parts of the food system, from industrial sources such as food processors, institutions like schools, colleges, universities, correctional facilities, from commercial places such as restaurants, grocery stores, hotels, and event centers, as well as right at home in our apartments, as well as our townhouses or wherever you reside. Food is not only lost at all of those different locations, but also lost across the whole entire food system, from the farming aspects to the harvesting to distribution, and then what we're going to kind of focus on today at the household level. So currently, when it comes to food waste, it's a predominantly linear scale where the food waste that we're producing ends up in the landfill. So if we put it in our trash can, and it's taken to a landfill somewhere. When food waste goes to a landfill, it breaks down without the presence of oxygen in an anaerobic state, and this releases greenhouse gases such as methane, and methane is a significant greenhouse gas that it's estimated that about 56% of the methane emissions that come from landfills comes from the breakdown of food waste. So when we put more food waste into the landfills, we're increasing that methane production, which is a harmful greenhouse gas that leads to climate change. So what we like to promote is a circular system where we use the food waste that we produce and keep it in a circular system. And we're going to kind of go over a few of those aspects to help create a more circular system. So instead of sending that food waste to the landfill, there's a variety of different options, starting with kind of the reduction aspects that we'll touch on today. We can donate the food that is edible to those in need, and then we can also dispose of it or recycle to be beneficially used. So we're going to first touch on the wasted food reduction aspect. So I know this is going to be a lot of us talking, so this is the interactive part of our program. So when it comes to how much food we actually waste at home, this number does include both inside and out. How much money do people think that we waste throughout the year as individuals? 850? 640? All right. So it is estimated. I love how you guys like chose both of the options. It was great. It is estimated that per person in the United States, people are wasting $720 worth of food. As I mentioned, this does account for maybe that food that you're wasting when you go to a restaurant and you don't finish everything on your plate, as well as that food that you're just wasting inside your household. So in saying that, we have a few different tips that we want to go over, with the first being how you can reduce the amount of food waste that you're creating when meal prepping and shopping. So kind of one of the key aspects is planning your meals before you go shopping. This allows you to buy only what you need to make those meals, and you won't pick up those small little things that end up being wasted when they're not used in your meals throughout the week. Before you go to the store, it's also good to take a look at your pantry, your freezer, and your fridge, so you know what you already have, and then you're only buying what you need to make those meals. Creating a shopping list is helpful. I know I often, if I don't go to the grocery store with a shopping list, I'm lost and I can't remember what I need to get, and I end up getting more than I need. Another super easy way to reduce the amount of food you're wasting is making sure you're looking at the deals. So oftentimes you'll have a buy one, get one deal. So you buy two, but really that deal is only going to benefit you if you're eating both of those things. So although it's a good deal, if you can't eat that item, it might be best just to buy that one. And most of the time those deals too, especially for the like 2 for $3, you'll still get the one item for that discounted price, regardless of if you purchase the two that they're marketing. Buying imperfect produce and shopping the bulk bins are two ways you can help. It helps you buy only what you need. When it comes to the bulk bins, you can just get that small quantity that you're looking for your meal. As well as buying imperfect produce, that kind of helps more of the grocery stores. So oftentimes that produce gets discarded at the grocery store, where if we're buying that as consumers, we can help reduce that from being wasted. And I think we probably all know this, but shopping on a full stomach kind of avoids you from buying that stuff that you might not, you might not need. I mean, we want it, but, and that can help you reduce the amount of food you're potentially getting and then not consuming and wasting. When it comes to cooking and prepping, utilizing ingredients for multiple different recipes is a way to make sure you're not having that half a head of lettuce go to waste during the week. If you incorporate it into 2 meals, you can make sure it's all used up. Also, making sure we make the right amount of food per the number of people we're feeding is really important. I know I struggle as a single person to make food just for me and not have to eat leftovers for 5 days in a row. So just knowing how to portion that the meal you're making out is really important to helping reduce that food waste. Leftovers is another way to help kind of reduce that amount of food that you're wasting. So making sure you eat those leftovers. I know that I'm guilty of being really bored after the 3rd or 4th day, but it's a good way to reduce the amount of food you're wasting. Date labels are also kind of tricky. So just understanding what the different ones mean and how that impacts whether or not you can eat it past the date is super important. And we do have all of the blue underlines parts of these slides are hyperlinked. So when we share this out, you'll be able to be directed to some resources to learn more about those. And then kind of talking about the date label sort of idea is saving food that's past its prime and using scraps are 2 ways to reduce food waste. So here on the screen, you can see that this is just an idea of how you can repurpose mashed potatoes or use different items as well.
I have to question, who really has leftover
True.
If you have mashed potatoes, raise your hand up right on.
Right. And then the last thing when it comes to wasted food reduction is storage. So on the slide, we have a few different kind of suggestions of things you can do to help yourself and just tips. So the Eat Me First spot in your fridge is one of the really big thing when it comes to food waste reduction that people kind of promote is having a dedicated spot within your fridge where you're putting those things that might be nearing their date, or maybe you bought a sour cream last week at the store and then you buy one again this week knowing you're going to need it, but put that sour cream that's going to go out of date first in that bin, so you make sure you eat it first. Storing your food properly in your fridge is really huge. There's a lot of good guides on where in your fridge you should put things depending on what the product is, whether you should leave it or put it on the door of your fridge, whether you should put it in one of the drawers or on the shelves. That can really make a difference in prolonging your the life of your food. There's also a lot of good storing fruit and veggie guides, which kind of do the same thing, but obviously some of our produce should be left out on the counter, some should be put in our pantry, and some should be refrigerated, and that can help prolong its life. And then the last thing is using your freezer as your friend. If you have something that you're not going to be able to eat in time, maybe you bought meat during the week and you see that the date is getting close, putting it in the freezer so you can use it in the future. Or just if you have leftovers, packaging up some of your lasagna and putting it in there for later, and then you can pull it out and you already have a meal and you prevented that from being wasted. So that's what I have on food waste reduction, and then I'm going to pass it over to Christine to talk about composting.
Okay, so as much as we try to reduce the food we're wasting, some of it is still going to go to waste, and that's where composting comes into the picture. So actually, before we get to that slide, who in the room currently composts? Okay, and if you're online, if you want to put it in the chat, if you currently compost, who in the past has composted but is not currently trying to get back into it? Okay, so we got a mix in the room here. That's great. So what is composting? So composting is really just the controlled decomposition of organic materials. And when we're talking about organic materials, that's really anything that can break down. So we're thinking about our wasted food that might be coming from our house, anything from our yard. So grass, leaves, wood chips, hay potentially. If you have chickens, could be your manure. So it's anything that organic that's going to break down. We're putting that into a controlled system and it's breaking down, and that essentially is composting.
So there was a question about why can't you put bones in meat? Does that not break down?
Yeah, so we'll get to that. Yeah, I'm going to hold on to that question. We'll get to that one. So composting landscape, I kind of mentioned this when I introduced who we are, but I just want to acknowledge that there is composting happening across the state at all different scales and sizes, and there's a lot of options depending on, you know, who you are, if you're at home, if you're part of an organization, and kind of the limitations that you might have. So that's everywhere from a large scale commercial composting facility where a compost pile might be as wide as this room and 3 or 4 times as long as this room. We have those types of facilities here in New York State. They handle a lot of food scraps and food waste from large businesses, then breaking it down to our community composting and all the way down to our home composting. So I just wanted to show some pictures of kind of composting that's happening in different scales. So this here is the city of Albany. They have a food scraps drop-off program, which we'll get into a little bit of what those are. There's a number of these programs across the state. Getting a little bit bigger, these are some of our larger scale compost sites across the state. So yeah, just kind of showing the scale of what can really exist in New York State. So composting in New York State, this is a map of where all of our composting facilities are happening across the state. And really, this is always growing year after year. These facilities takes all type of waste. So our food waste, our yard trimmings, manure. These facilities are the ones that are taking the boned meat, dairy products, where we're not really doing that as much at home. So we always say, if you can't compost at home because 1, you're not interested in doing it, or 2, maybe you live in an apartment or you don't have access to an outdoor space, Food scraps drop-off programs are a really great and easy entry point. These are programs that have been growing tenfold across the state year after year. And these are programs where you can go and bring your food waste to this program, drop it off in the bin, and someone else will compost it. You don't have to worry about it. So there's actually a number of these programs in the capital region. They're either managed through your local city, county, town, village, or they might be at a farmer's market managed by a nonprofit. So I know, for example, like the Schenectady Green Market has a drop-off spot. The Troy Farmers Market has a drop-off spot. Town of Bethlehem, City of Albany. So they're kind of popping up across the capital region. So if, you know, composting at home isn't for you, this is a great option. Question?
The transfer station in Gilderland, do they do it?
I'd have to look into it, but we have this. So this is a map that's interactive and people can zoom in on the links and kind of check out what's available. But we can look into that. So, yep. So the question was, if you don't live in a municipality that offers a food scraps drop-off program, can you use it? And it really depends on the program. Some of them have it limited to their, you know, residents just because of how the program is paid for, while others are open to everyone. So each program is kind of managed in its own way.
So you drop it off and then you get it back, you know, if you want to use it, or it's just.
Yeah, so in most of the programs, you just drop your food scraps off. Usually it's for free. There's no fee associated with this. They'll make it into compost, but some of the programs, if you participate, they'll allow you to come and get a compost pickup. So yeah, it kind of just depends on the program. Another option, which is slowly growing across the state, is curbside collection. So if you currently maybe have your recycling or your garbage picked up at the curb, the next movement is to try to get curbside pickup of your food scraps. So you would put it out once a week. When I used to live in the city of Albany, I had my food scraps picked up by the Radix Center. So I would put my bin out once a week. They would, you know, empty my bin. I'd clean the tote out, and then I would just start collecting again. So these are programs. Once again, this is part of our interactive map that we'll share afterwards, but you can kind of zoom around and see what the service areas are to see if that's an option in your area. And the residential curbside pickup usually is a payment scale. It's not, I don't think, overly burdensome, so just another option. Okay, so here's what we're really here to talk about is our home composting. So this is our home composting poster. We like to say making compost takes some care, add your greens, browns, water, and air. So we'll kind of move through each part of this poster and talk about the different steps of the process. So talking about our greens. So our greens are our source of nitrogen. Your greens you can kind of think of as any type of food scrap. So that's going to be your fruit and vegetable scraps. Could be bread, rice, pasta. I know coffee grounds is popular, eggshells, tea bags, any of that type of stuff is going to be considered your green. Also, any of your grass clippings is also considered a green. And it's important that when you're looking at your greens, that you're also thinking about what your browns are, and that's going to be your leaves and your wood chips we're going to get into. And we'll talk a bit about how you want to make sure that they're complementing each other and they're balanced in your pile to have a most successful composting pile. So storing your greens, collecting them in your home, this can happen a number of ways. That green kitchen caddy, you can buy one of those. If you search like countertop kitchen caddy, you can get them online. Sometimes if you go to Earth Day events or different type of events in your communities, they might be giving these types of caddies away, but it's really just a bucket to store your food scraps in. You can also more simply just use a bowl. I've done that as well. If you are trying to hold on to your food scraps longer, I know like this is popular in New York City. A lot of folks will store their food scraps in a bowl in their fridge or freezer, and that just helps kind of prolong them. So to kind of bring down the odor factor. Sometimes this can be especially useful in the summertime. Our homes are just heating up faster. So everything is, the odor is just moving around a bit more. So yeah, you can totally put it in your fridge or your freezer. I used to, when I lived in Albany, I used to keep them in my fridge in the summertime. So then once we have our greens, we want to move into thinking about our browns. If you are thinking about composting at home, it's really important that you make sure that you have a source of browns. We all have our source of greens. We're all generating some type of food waste in our homes for the most part. So it's really important that you have a source of browns. So that can be leaves, that could be straw, it could be hay, it could be wood chips. Some sticks, we don't want to make our compost pile that's mostly sticks. You can have some sticks in there. But yeah, it's really good that you have the balance just in your pile. So what is that balance? Typically, it's 2 to 1 browns to greens. So if you have your bucket or your bowl of food scraps that you're dumping into your compost pile, we would recommend that you then take, 2 times whatever that quantity was of browns and put that on top of your greens. So you can mix it around a little bit, but make sure that your food scraps are completely covered by your browns, because that is what's keeping the odors down. That's what's preventing some of the, the flies that might start going around your pile. That's kind of helping to control all of that. Okay, so back to our rhyme. Making compost takes some care. Add greens, browns, water, and air. So now we'll move into the water and air part. So just like humans, there's microorganisms in the compost pile that are helping to break down what is in that pile. And just like us, those microorganisms need water and air to really thrive in that compost pile. So typically your compost pile is just going to get water from any of the food scraps that are in it. Moisture from that food is going to come out of the food as it's breaking down, and it'll go into the pile. Additionally, if it's raining, it's going to go into your compost pile, which is great. Sometimes your compost pile can actually be too dry, so it's okay to add water to it, whether that be with a watering can or your hose potentially. There's a good at-home test to kind of figure out if your compost pile is at the right level of moisture. So if you were to kind of dig into your compost pile a little bit and grab a handful of it, you're going to squeeze it. If water is streaming down your arm, that means that your compost pile is far too wet. It's probably going to get stinky because there's too much water and moisture in there, and the conditions are going to become anaerobic, which means there's no oxygen in there. So when conditions become anaerobic, that's when you're really going to get that odor. If you, once again, go in your pile and squeeze it and no water is coming out, and you open your hand and everything just kind of falls out of your hand, that means your pile is too dry and you need to add some water to it. And then once again, if you squeeze it and you've got water just kind of coming out between your fingertips, that means it's the perfect level of moisture.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Would shredded brown paper or torn up bits of cardboard count as brown?
Yeah, so we can consider any type of paper or cardboard as a brown. We would recommend that you don't overwhelm your home composting pile with paper or cardboard. And if you're going to add it, make sure that it is shredded up just to kind of increase that surface area so the buggies in the pile can help break it down faster. Talking about air, so air can move into your pile in a number of ways. If you've got an open pile on the ground, or maybe you've got a pile that's encased in wire, air is just naturally going to move through the pile, which is wonderful. We can also help air movement through the pile based on what we're putting into our pile. So for example, if you had a pile mostly of grass, that grass gets matted and all of the air, there's no air pockets in that. And that's once again where you kind of start to create those anaerobic conditions and get those odors. So you can help the airflow with adding leaves of different sizes, putting wood chips in there, adding some sticks in there. When you build your compost pile, you're going to want to start with a layer of wood chips or sticks on the very bottom, and that helps kind of initiate airflow up through the bottom and up through your compost pile. So the question that came up earlier, we recommend that homeowners do not add meats, dairies, fats, and oils to their compost pile. If you are an expert home composter, 100% you can add these things, but we generally do not recommend that you do. And the reason for that is most home compost piles are not getting up to that temperature that's really breaking those things down quickly. So ideally your home compost pile is getting up to 131 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. Meat, dairy, fat, and oil as well. If your home compost pile is not getting hot enough, it's going to encourage animals to potentially go digging in there. If you are actively managing your pile and it's hitting those temperatures of 131 or higher, the compost pile is going to be too hot for the animals to dig into. Their nose is going to feel that heat and they're immediately going to be turned away. So most home systems, mine included, is often not at that 131 or higher. So it's just best not to add the meat, dairy, fats, or oils. Our commercial facilities across the state, all of those are getting well over 131. So you might be part of a food scraps drop-off program or a curbside collection program that says you can put those in there. And that's because their piles are daily monitored and the temperatures are getting high and kept high all the time. Any questions?
Just one about, does Albany City allow drop off non-residents for dropping off? But I don't know if we have to know that.
Do you remember that? We were gonna look this up the other day. Brandon and I are both sunburnt because we were at an outdoor event yesterday on Compost.
I would say I don't think that they do. You need to like sign up to be a part of it. So I don't think like overall the system accepts.
Okay, just you say it on your end.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we think you have to sign up for it, but that's something that we can look into. But they do have a couple different drop-off programs. And sometimes by signing up, it really just means that the program wants you to go through a quick education video. They want to make sure that you're trained in what can and cannot go in there. It'll take typically under 10 minutes, but they just want to make sure that you're consuming that education piece before you start participating. Another one we don't have on here, and I can't remember if we have it in the presentation, is a number of you, have you guys seen like compostable products out in the world? Like a compostable cup, straw, plate? Yep. I would also recommend you not to put those in your home composting system. Once again, if you're an expert home composter, you feel like your pile's always hitting those 131 or higher temperatures, feel free to experiment, maybe put in a bag, maybe put in a plate, see how your system does with it. But generally, the compostable products are not made for at-home composting, and they really should be only going to commercial facilities. Yeah.
Eggshells. I've heard yes and no.
I put eggshells in mine, and I've never had any problems with animals, so I say yes.
How do you know if your compost pile was at 130 degrees? Can we measure that?
Yeah, so the surest way is to buy an at-home compost temperature. I actually should have brought mine. It's about like this long. If you just search like compost or I said temperature, I meant thermometer, compost thermometer. If you just Google that, there's a couple different companies that will pop up with at-home versions. The commercial versions are like 3 to 5 feet long. You can buy that if you want to, but there's shorter versions that are much cheaper. Okay, so there's a couple different types of systems. And I guess I will add, I didn't talk about this before, but when you're building your composting system, we talked about kind of the balance between the browns and the greens. As you're building your system, so as I mentioned, you're going to start with a layer of sticks or wood chips to kind of help with that airflow. Then put a layer of leaves. Then you'll add your food scraps bucket on top of that. And then you'll cover it with your brown. So that's our balance. And so you'll just kind of keep building, and we call that lasagna layering. So you've got your leaves, you'll add your bucket of food, more leaves, bucket of food, more leaves. And that's kind of how your compost pile grows upward. So I was talking with you earlier, there's really no wrong way to do composting. There's this huge spectrum of what can be right with composting. There's a lot of different systems, a lot of different setups. Ultimately, if your pile is not smelling and things are breaking down and you're ending with a compost product, then you're composting, and you should applaud that. If it takes 4 months or it takes a year, it doesn't matter, you're composting. So we'll kind of go through some of the types and the methods. So an open pile is really the easiest. You just start kind of growing your pile up. It's not constrained on anything. It typically is going to start to take a cone shape, which is good. But yeah, it's the simplest form. Anyone here just kind of open pile composting? Yep. Do you like your systems? Do you have any issues with it?
No issue.
Okay, great. Awesome. And what do you put in yours?
Everything except no dairy, no meat.
Okay.
I have a couple buckets, and I just put everything that the tail end of whatever you cut up or whatever.
Yeah, all your like trimmings and
My
everything.
trimmings, yeah.
Okay.
No seed.
Oh, fair.
I had a question from online. Are there ways to prevent rodents and other critters from being attracted to your compost?
Yeah, so we'll get into that with some of these. So you can make a lot of different types of homemade bins. This one on the right is mine actually in my backyard. So I have 2 wire bins side by side. I bought some stakes and I wrapped wire around it. It's not overly complicated. I bought a house and this was like one of the first things I did. I was very excited. But yeah, you can build your home composting bins with bricks, with wooden fencing, wood pallets, wire fencing like we have here. There's really all different types of materials. When you start building some type of barrier around your home composting bin, that's what's also going to help deter some of those animals that might get in there. I have never seen any signs of animals getting into mine. I think, I'm really making sure that my food scraps are covered. Obviously, if you're doing more of like that cinder block in the upper left-hand corner that has an open face, maybe an animal could go digging in there if you don't have a good balance. But yeah, once you kind of start enclosing your system, that also helps deter animals from getting in. It's not foolproof, of course, but it does help. The bigger thing with the animal control is making sure that you have enough browns to fully cover your food scraps. And once animals figure out that your compost pile is a consistent source of food for them, they're going to keep coming back time and time again. So it's just important to cut that off before it even starts. I would say if animals do find that your compost pile is a food source, taking a block of time just to stop adding to it so they kind of break their habit, they might travel elsewhere to start finding food. That's a good way to kind of reset your system. Another kind of more advanced system is to do a 3-bin system, which I think this is something that I'm going to expand to. The nice thing about doing a 3-bin system is one of the bins can act as your brown storage. So that's where you can put all your leaves or mix it with wood chips, whatever you have. And then let's say I did that on the far left. In the middle, I would start that as my active composting pile. So that's when I'll start doing my lasagna layering of materials in there. Let's say it gets to 2/3 full. I can flip it from the middle to the far right side. So now I'm letting it kind of cure in that final, and that's where that final breakdown is going to happen. And then I can start a new active pile in the middle. So that's kind of the pros of this, kind of going back to my system right here. So I've got my leaves on the left-hand side and my active composting is on the right-hand side. You can't really see, but there is a break halfway through that pile with another layer of fencing. So in order for me to harvest my active compost on the right-hand side, I'm going to either have to, 1, stop adding to it so that everything can break down and I can harvest it, or 2, I'm going to have to kind of scrape off the active stuff and then harvest the bottom and then put the active stuff back in. So, but I just wanted to dive in right away. So that's what I started with, but that's kind of the pros of the 3-bin system. You can also buy store-bought bins. So these are enclosed systems. On the left-hand side is the earth machine. And so that is, there's a cap on the top of that. And so you would take that cap off and you start layering your browns and your greens in there. And then that just kind of sits there, you let it decompose. And then at the bottom there's that lip that you pull up so you can harvest your compost from the bottom. Sometimes people in city settings like to purchase these just to help encourage, keep any type of squirrels, rats, mice, whatever out of your compost system. It's really up to you. Another is getting some type of tumbler, which is on the right-hand side. So you would, on the front face there, that kind of opens up and you can load in your food scraps and your browns, give it a tumble every time you add it in there. So there's just, pros and cons. I would say a con to a tumbler system is it's much more limited in the amount that you can put into it. A pro is that it's off the ground if that's something you're looking for. It's raised if that's something you're looking for. Yeah, so on the tumbler systems, there's usually kind of like drilled holes around it. So the air is just moving through those holes. And then also when the handle there, it helps you turn it. Some of the tumblers also sit right on the ground. And so you kind of roll it with your hands. But yeah, typically there's holes either on either end or on the barrel around it. So picking a spot of where to compost is just something to consider. You want to make sure that you're picking a relatively well-drained area in your backyard. You don't want to build your compost pile where you know that it's going to pond up whenever there's a good rain. Once again, if your compost is too wet, that's when you're really going to get the odors. You can compost in the sun or the shade. If you're composting in the sun, it might help your compost, get hotter quicker, but there's not a huge difference. It's not a huge deal if you're composting in the sun versus shade. And then if you want to think about kind of being near a water source, once again, talking about that moisture, making sure if you really want to have an active pile that your pile has the right moisture in it. But once again, near a water source, if you have a watering can, you can just go over with that too, or you can just rely on the rain. So pile management, I kind of touched on this. So you can be really active with managing your compost pile, or you can take a more passive approach. There isn't a right or a wrong way. You can do either. So thinking if you're taking a more active approach, what does that look like? You're probably monitoring your temperature, so making sure they're over 131. You're going to be turning your pile every couple of weeks, and that kind of reintroduces air into the pile and just helps mix everything up. You're likely killing your weed seeds. Weed seeds, you need to get over that 131 degree to start killing off some of those weed seeds. You're going to produce compost faster. Usually at home, it'd probably take 3 to 4 months if you're really actively managing it. If you want to take a more passive approach, maybe you're turning it once a year, once a season. Maybe you're not turning it at all. Maybe you're kind of turning it around with a pitchfork or a shovel or something. But in that case, you're probably going to produce compost once a year. You can kind of dig around, see if like your food scraps are breaking down. If it's taking a little bit longer, that's totally fine. But yeah, as I mentioned, either way is right. The ultimate goal is just to create compost, and it doesn't matter how long it takes to get there.
I just had a quick couple questions.
Yeah.
So much about that. Again, with food, I think you already answered this. Online, they said they were told bread, pasta, and rice could not be put in the compost because it will stink. Is this correct?
Nope. We totally encourage you to add any of the bread, pasta, rice, grains. All of that is good.
Okay. And
even if it's moldy too. I put moldy stuff into my compost pile all the time.
another one, and a small suburban plot, you can't have a compost pile because you're too close to neighbors and no room. And I didn't know if you wanted to bust that myth or not.
Yeah.
How to raise the temperature, especially in winter months?
Yeah, both good questions. So yeah,
they can hear that online, but
I would say, okay, so question number one was stating, I guess more of a statement, that you can't compost in suburban areas on a small plot. I would say that is a myth. We're here to bust that myth. If you are really managing your pile and once again making sure that you have more than enough browns, you're not going to have odors. I've never walked back to my pile and really had offensive odors wafting around. Of course, if once again, if your pile is too wet and you start digging around, the odors are going to be released and you're going to kind of get this plume of odors. But generally, there's no problem composting in a suburb. There's actually rather large composting facilities in New York City that have neighbors that are IKEA and other types of businesses. So yeah, it's totally possible to compost on a small plot. And once again, if that's not for you, or maybe your neighbors are giving you a hard time, look to see if there's a food scraps drop-off program in your community. And that way you can still participate, but maybe you're not getting your hands dirty yourself. And the second question, remind me.
How do you get the temperature up in the winter?
Oh, right. Yeah, so something that is unique to the Northeast is we're getting cold in the winter time. So it is more challenging to keep your compost pile up to temperature. Some people will insulate their compost pile. So they'll add kind of a wire around their bin and they'll stuff that with leaves, and that can help kind of insulate some of that temperature. But if you're a more passive composter, realistically, your compost pile is going to go cold over the winter time, and that is okay. It happens. Maybe you kind of hold back from adding food scraps to it. If you would still like to go out there and add the food scraps, like I still continue to add my food scraps throughout the winter. I still make sure I'm putting my browns in there, and then in the springtime, it'll just pick up. Our winters have been temperatures a bit more dramatic of one day it's really cold and the next day it warms up. So the pile will just pick up whenever that temperature crawls back up there and the bugs become more active. One thing about if you're using a tumbler system or if you're using an enclosed composter like that Black Earth machine, If you're using a tumbler, I would honestly recommend that you pause for the winter time, because typically what happens is in the tumblers is whatever is in there becomes an ice brick if it gets really cold. So I would recommend, if you have a tumbler, to just pause for the winter and pick it back up in the spring. So yeah, wood chips is, I know, sometimes a harder source to come by at home to add to your compost pile, but wood chips really can help kind of ignite some of the heat that's going in your compost pile. There's a lot of good surface area, and then also it really helps with the airflow into the pile. So troubleshooting some of the odors. This is all on our New York State DEC home composting webpage. If you ever have issues at all, we have a number of these charts kind of troubleshooting different things. So let's say your pile smells. Like I mentioned, maybe there's too much water. There might not be enough air, so you can turn the pile. Be aware that if that is the case, if your pile smells, if you turn it, there probably will be a release of odors, but that will hopefully help those odors go away. Pile smells, and once again, too many greens, so you don't have that balance of browns, so make sure you're adding your browns in there. You might look at your pile and go, I don't think it's doing anything. And maybe it is, maybe it's not. You want to make sure that you have a decent sized mass when you're starting to compost. So we typically say somewhere in like the 3 by 3 foot range is kind of a good amount of material to start composting. You know, if you had a pile that was 1 foot by 1 foot, there's just not enough there to really get the system going. So you do have to somewhat think about how big your pile is. Once again, thinking about the water and your airflow through the pile. And maybe there's just too many browns, and that's why it seems like it's not doing anything. It will eventually compost. It's just going to take longer. Fruit flies is another thing that people are typically concerned about. So if you have a lot of fruit flies around your pile, it's probably because your food isn't buried deep enough into the pile. So once again, that's just making sure that you're adding more of your browns. Typically try to bury your food 3 inches or more in there if you're having an issue with fruit flies or other type of flies just buzzing around your pile. Fruit fly. We talked about the animals near the bin. Once again, maybe your food's not buried deep enough, so just try to put more browns on top of it to bury it down. Your bin might not be animal resistant. You can try to insulate it with a 1/2 inch hardware cloth, just harder for them to kind of dig in there and get into the pile. So vermicomposting, we won't really get into, but this is another option. Especially if you want to compost indoors. A lot of people have their vermicomposters right in their home and there's no issues with them. Red wiggler worms are the best for vermicomposting. You don't want to make a worm bin and go outside and collect your earthworms. Red wigglers really are the best for this, and you can actually order them through the mail. There's also the Adirondack Worm Farm, which is about 1.5 hours north of here. If you're in that area, I believe he sells like a little container of red wigglers if you're interested.
Also Stewart's.
Where?
Now sells red wigglers.
Are they earthworms though?
They have red wigglers.
Oh, okay.
And they have earthworms.
Oh, cool. All right, so maybe Stewart's. So these are just different types of worm composting bins. There's a lot of information online about vermicomposting. You can DIY your own home bin, or you can buy an established vermicomposting bin. But yeah, there's a lot of information if you do want to create your own. Pet waste is another one. We do not recommend that you add dog or cat waste into your home composting systems. There's a lot of potential issues with pathogens that are in there. So absolutely do not, even if you're an expert home composter, do not add dog or cat poop into your pile. If you have rabbit, gerbil, hamster, all of that is good. They're, eating more of the veg, so their poop kind of just honestly falls right apart in the compost pile. So that's not a problem. If you want to do like chicken manure or any of the other type of animal manure, that's also okay. It's really just stay away from the dog and cat poop.
I had a couple questions on the red wigglers. Can you add red wigglers to the outdoor compost, or should you do earthworms? And can you add worms to your tumbler?
So the red wigglers, I don't believe would make it through the winter time. Natural earthworms that are moving around, if your pile is touching the ground, they're going to naturally come up through the ground and into your pile. I know when I've dug mine back, they're just kind of naturally hanging out at the bottom. So I don't think that you necessarily need to go and add worms to your home compost pile. They're going to kind of come there naturally if they want to. As far as putting them in your tumbler, I guess you could, but I don't think it's totally necessary.
The pickups for, that the municipalities do, would you recommend pet waste in those or not so much?
No, I would keep your pet waste in the garbage. Yeah. Okay, so use for your compost, and something we don't talk about is how do you know when your compost is done? So if you're looking at your compost pile, you don't recognize anything that you initially put into it, and you pick it up and it just smells like soil, that means that congrats, you've made your compost. So yeah, so just make sure that your compost doesn't have any odor if you're sniffing it and you can't recognize any food in it. Maybe if you put an avocado pit, that could potentially still be in there. You can pick that out and, toss it back into your active composting. But that's really your indicators to let you know that your compost is finished. Finished compost, like I said, really should just look like soil, but it's now packed with nutrients. So there's a lot of different uses for it on your property. You could kind of spread it around your garden, both your flower garden or your vegetable garden. You can spread it on your lawn. You could incorporate it into houseplants if you'd like. You can mulch it around your trees or your shrubs. That kind of helps to reduce weeds and retain. Compost can hold a lot of moisture in it, so that also can help retain moisture. If you want to give it to your neighbors, yeah, there's just kind of endless uses. If you are kind of like, oh, I don't have that many garden beds or this or that, honestly, just put it on your grass, and that's also a great use for it.
One quick question, can shredded newspapers be used for your browns?
Yep, so the question was, can shredded newspapers be used for your browns? And the answer is yes. Just make sure, once again, that they are shredded and that it's not the primary source of browns in your bin.
So the leaves, only because I was raking leaves today.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to get rid, but so, I mean, should you put them like in a big bag somewhere to save them? You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I have leaves all the time.
Right. Yeah. And it's really important in the fall time to save your leaves. So I would say if you want to build like a wire bin, kind of like I had shown in my home compost. So what I do in the fall time is I fill that to the top, and then that actually gives me my browns for the entire year. So I would say, or if you don't have that, you could use like a garbage can, but keep the lid off of it. Or I guess you could keep the lid on it as well. But yeah, if you want to just you want to store those, because that's like your gold to make sure your compost is happening throughout the year. Or if you want to pile them in a certain area where maybe the wind isn't going to push them everywhere, because I know people are trying to control where the leaves are. But I would say too, if you live on a larger property as well and you have too many leaves, we also encourage that you just mow over them. It's called mulch mowing. So that's something that I do at my house. So I collect enough leaves to fill my bin, and then I just mow over the rest of the leaves. And within 24 hours, it's amazing how much they've sunk into the grass. So you can use any type of mower and you just mow right over them.
I've used a leaf blower, not as a blower, but it has a bag attached so you can chop up the leaves.
Yeah.
And then put it in those big brown bags. They stay like in a dry spot. It
Yeah.
stays all in.
Yeah, that's another great idea. And then also, yeah, if you do want to shred your leaves, shredding your leaves can also just help retain moisture in your compost pile. The larger leaves are just kind of, the moisture is in there, but the rain is falling off a bit more. If your leaves are shredded in some fashion, however you're doing that, that also helps retain moisture in your pile.
Have you ever noticed the difference between the type of leaves? In other words, oak leaves versus maple leaves. I've had in the past problems with oak leaves.
Yeah.
So they do not go in with my plants.
Yeah. So for those online, the question was preference on type of leaves, specifically calling out oak leaves. So yeah, oak leaves are definitely harder to break down. Like I know in my yard, I have mostly maple trees. So up to you if you want to add the oak leaves, but yeah, generally they're going to take a lot longer to break down. you know, your leaves are all kind of combined, but if there was a way for you to kind of break those oak leaves down a bit more, just to help them give a, you know, a kick start to the breakdown process, that might help with oak leaves specifically.
What about pine needles? I have a lot of pine needles.
Oh yeah, good question. So the question was about pine needles, adding those. We don't really recommend that you add pine needles to the compost pile. Yeah, they're too acidic and they just don't really break down that well. You know, if you like sprinkle some in, that's totally fine. But yeah, you shouldn't be like really actively being like, oh, this is my brown using my pine needles. So we typically recommend to keep them out. What was that? Yeah, yeah.
Regarding pine needles, I've read as an example, to utilize your pine needles as a mulch for an acid-loving plant like blueberry or this or that or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Oh, hydrangeas was mentioned over here.
How do you make compost tea?
Yeah, so the question was about compost tea. So this is, I would say, something that's slowly growing in the industry. So compost tea, what you would do is what I've seen done is you kind of have like a cloth bag and you would put some compost in there, soak it in water. Usually, I think typically there's like an aerator in there that's helping just to kind of get everything going in there. I can't remember how long it soaks for, but eventually you would let it sit for so long and then you can take it out and you can water it on your plants and stuff like that. No, this is not to drink, not to drink, not that. Yeah, it's for your plants to drink. Yeah. Yeah.
3 months typically for it to break down so that you can use it. 3 to
Yeah, I would.
year, up to a year, depending on the size. Is that
Right. I would say if you're a really active composter, 3 to 4 months. 3 would be fast, probably more like 4 to 5. And if you're more passive, it'll take anywhere from 9 months to a year. Well, for those who are composting in the room, how long do you think it takes for you to get compost?
Once a season.
Once a season.
yeah, usually
A season, not a year.
Yeah.
No. Once a season? I think for me, it's once a year. I must be passive.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I meant by a season,
Oh,
once a year.
once a year. I usually put it in the spring.
Yeah. And that's typically, I would say, when people are harvesting, which makes sense because you're preparing your garden beds and kind of ready for the summer growth.
But I pile things up all through the year.
Yeah.
And whenever it's not frozen, then I probe it and stir it and do whatever I can do. And it's at that point of the year now where what I do is get it all together and actually sift it.
Yes. Yeah.
And what isn't broken down goes back in the pile, and what winds up in a wheelbarrow gets used.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point. Something we don't have in here is the sifting process. If you want to sift your compost at home, it's not necessary. It's just if you want to get out those items that are larger, we call them overs. So you could, you know, have 2 pieces of wood, make a box frame, and then put some wire over it, put that on top of a wheelbarrow, and then shovel your compost on there, kind of shake it around, and your compost that is going to fall through the wire will then go into your wheelbarrow. Everything that's bigger will stay on top, and you can toss that back into your brown bin and reincorporate that into your compost pile. Sifting isn't necessary, but it's just if you want to, maybe you're, you know, working with wood chips and you want it, the wood chips haven't broken down yet, you can sift those out, put them back into your brown bin.
I think this person might have missed the slide, but they're asking, how do I select the right location for my composting bin?
Yeah, so selecting the right location for your composting bin, the number one thing is really you don't want to choose an area where it's going to be wet. There's going to be ponding. That's just not great for your compost. And then you can compost in either the sun or the shade. If it's in the sun, it could be a little bit warmer for your compost pile, but it's not a big deal. And if you are thinking about wanting to add water to your compost pile, you should think about just your location to a water source. And, you know, also, I guess if you do have neighbors that are close by, I think you could probably be a little strategic in placing where maybe it's not right next to your neighbors that have a deck outside. Maybe you're doing it in the back corner. So I think kind of staying conscious of your neighbors is a good idea too.
Couple, thank you very much for an informative session. And someone asked, what would a town have to do to start a composting of food waste for their locals?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, so there's a lot of towns that have done this. Food scraps. Well, so first off, through DEC, through our group, we offer annual grant programs to help municipalities start either food scraps drop-off program, start an outreach and education program about home composting, or if they want to start a larger scale facility, we offer annual grants to help them do that. We also can work with them to connect them with other municipalities who have launched programs and initiatives. So we're more than happy to do that. They can, if anyone is interested, they can email one of our emails on the screen here and we can kind of talk to you further about that.
Yeah, they're asking where are the grant applications?
Yeah. So our grant application did just close, but we'll have another one coming. There's a couple different grant programs that I can connect you to online. To them, there's like the community grants program, which are smaller scale projects that can help smaller composting initiatives start up. But yeah, the food scraps drop-off programs, that was really something that started in Scarsdale, and they started the program. They offered to everyone around them, here are the free materials to start your program. So there's a lot of effort and community around there. The organics recycling community is very friendly and supportive, and everyone is willing to share their materials to help get programs off the ground.
If you have time, can you mentioned weeds would be killed in the compost heap. Does that apply to creeping Charlie? I don't think anything.
Yeah. So we would, yeah, I would say don't put that in there. We would also like pretty much any type. Yeah, any type of disease plant as well, you really should not be putting in there. Any type of invasive plant, I also would not recommend to put in your compost pile, because if your pile is not getting up to temperature and then you go and put that compost out onto your property, there's a chance that that stuff is going to start to grow or to spread whatever disease that you had initially put in there. So that's another item we don't recommend to put in there.
On that point with seeds, I think someone else had mentioned when they're collecting their food scraps to avoid putting seeds in their scraps just because it'll want to grow in your compost pile.
Yeah, we've seen some facilities that have tomato plants growing all over the place. And you know, if that doesn't bother you and you just want to pluck them out before they get too big, you know, you can do it that way as well.
What about ash from either a fireplace or?
Yeah, ash is another one that we wouldn't recommend to put in.
No.
Mm-mm.
Oh, my mother always did.
I know some people will. I mean, you can, but we wouldn't recommend it.
I don't have.
The question was about ash for those online, if you didn't hear. Recommended not to put ash in your home compost pile. Yeah.
This goes back to the first couple slides about food waste from grocery stores and retail. Is a lot of that due to just lack of infrastructure? Those restaurants and things not putting their food waste in composting facilities, or where does that come from?
Yeah. So a big part of it is price and that extra to pay for another hauler or service to come pick up those food scraps. So that's something we're really pushing. I think it's a big part of it. I always say the organics field is where recycling was 25, 30 years ago. People know that it exists, but they're not necessarily wanting to pay that extra price to incorporate it into their business structure. So yeah, we're working with them to educate them on how to do that. There sometimes can be potential cost savings for a business if they're able to decrease their garbage collection and then add the food scraps collection. So sometimes it might be neutral. There could be a potential cost savings there. But yeah, I think it's just kind of starting to create the norm. A lot of large like grocery chains actually across the state are both donating and recycling their food scraps. So yeah, change is happening, but it is slow, but the state law is really helping to ignite some of that.
Someone is asking online, can you compost in ventilated plastic buckets, or would it be better in a metal one?
I think in a bucket, your compost system is probably not large enough in order to have a good mass that's going to heat up properly. So I think as far as a bucket, unless it was
Really big.
pretty big, I don't think I would recommend to compost in a bucket. If you do want to explore it, I would recommend that it has some sort of slots or holes on the side that will help with airflow.
And add worms.
And add worms maybe, yeah. Yeah, at that point you could look into vermicomposting.
Going back to the food, when you're starting to, before you dump it in, when I'm cooking and cutting up things, is it best to cut all those scraps up into pieces? Would that work better, or it doesn't matter, it's just a whole lettuce leaves and whatever you?
Yeah, so the question in the room was about when you're collecting your food scraps, if you should size reduce them. So yeah, I would say it depends. So if you're cutting like a watermelon or a cantaloupe, try to cut that, the skin of it into smaller cubes, maybe like an inch or 2 inches wide. And that just increases the surface area to allow the bugs to help break it down. If you're doing anything with like veggies, like zucchini, onion, peppers, I think it's fine, whatever size you're kind of cutting off of that. But generally speaking, like you wouldn't really, I mean, you can, it's just going to take longer. Like if something can be, I would say 2 to 3 inches or smaller in size, that'll just help it break down faster.
Anybody else?
Great question.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Thank you
Thank you for coming.
so much. Thank you, everybody online for joining us tonight.
If anybody here wants to, put their email address for the PowerPoint, just stop on your way out and give us your name and
Yes,
email.
I had somebody online wanting the PowerPoint.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.